Hi, welcome back aboard Voya. This is going to be a fairly short video and I want to talk about the fuel system. There are three things which will stop a marine diesel engine. First is Dieselbug, next is build-up of sludge, and the third one is water, and they're actually all related. Dieselbug is a gelatinous goop. It's a microorganism. It doesn't grow on diesel. We call it Dieselbug, but it doesn't actually grow on diesel. It grows on the water which can collect in your diesel system. And it forms a skin over the top of the diesel, usually. And that will stop a diesel engine in moments if that gets sucked into the fuel system. In order to prevent Dieselbug, we need to keep the water out of the diesel system. Water on its own shouldn't stop your engine. It should collect in the water separator on your main filter. But we need to get rid of it to make sure we don't get Dieselbug. The third one is sludge, and there is always a certain amount of muck in diesel when you pick it up. It may have been sitting in a storage tank for a while. Not every facility keeps their tanks super clean. A lot depends on how much fuel they sell. In my cruising ground, we've got a number of fuel supply points that are very small and don't do high volume. I would always treat their diesel with a little bit of suspicion. So we need to keep diesel clean, and a good filter system on your boat can guarantee that you get a clean supply of fuel. We do this in two stages. The first one is what's called the pre-filter. That's the filter that goes between the tank and the engine. It's usually a 30 micron filter. There's then a fine filter which is actually fitted on the engine. That's a 10 micron filter. A micron is 1/1000th of a millimetre, so they're pretty fine. The second line of defence is how to actually clean your fuel when it's on board. If you're leaving the boat over the winter with fuel in the tanks, even if you top them up, you can get condensation and water in the diesel. You'll also find that any sediment will settle out and you'll get a layer of sludge in the bottom of the tank. To deal with sludge build-up and get rid of any water that's accumulated over a winter season, what we need to use is a fuel scrubber. And I've got one of those fitted and I'll show you how that works. If your cruising ground is a pretty popular area, you've got good clean fuel supply, you don't tend to store fuel over the winter, the fuel scrubber side of it might be overkill. If, like me, you do expedition sailing in remote areas with who knows what sort of supply, or you have large tanks and need to keep large quantities of fuel, then a fuel scrubber is a very worthwhile investment in order to keep your diesel clean. But it is quite an expensive one. So let me show you around the system that I've set up, which I think pretty much guarantees you always have a clean supply of diesel. Like most things that go wrong on a boat, contaminated fuel always hits at the worst possible time. The classic scenario is you've got a headwind, so you're under motor, you're coming into a river, there's a bar over the edge of the river, the tide is flooding, so you've got wind over tide, you're running into shallow water, that picks up a short sharp chop, the boat starts bouncing around, that shakes up everything in the tank. That's when the contamination gets sucked through into your diesel system and the whole thing grinds to a halt. And that leaves you on a river bar with no power. Okay, this is how I've done the fuel system. So if we look at this line here, this is the main feed from the fuel tank. That comes to two tee-off points. Each of those T's feeds a shut-off valve that feeds fuel to a fuel filter. So we have two separate fuel filters. Those come down here and they combine again here, and then we have a main shut-off down here. So in normal circumstances, one of these would be on and one of them would be off. When you shut the fuel off to the engine, you use this tap here to shut the fuel off. When you want to run the engine, you simply open that as per normal. The beauty of this system is that these are designed to collect water, debris. If you get some contamination coming through in the fuel, these filter bowls are not that big. They can fill up and clog. And believe me, I've spent a lot of time clearing things like that. To clear them is fairly simple. You simply unscrew this screw. That releases the valve, lets this drain. But if you do that while you're running the engine, you've got no fuel coming through to the engine. So what you want to be able to do, if this filter clogs, we can simply open this one, close this one. That system's now not doing anything, so we can open the valve and we can drain any mucky fuel out of it. If need be, we can take the filter off and change the filter, all while the engine is still running. When you're installing this sort of system, you want to try and make sure it's in a reasonably accessible place. I don't want to have to crawl past a hot running engine to get at my fuel supply. It needs to be clear space. You also need enough space to be able to take your filter bowls off and your filters out without having to dismantle anything. So that's step one in making a bomb-proof filter system. On its own, that would probably be enough for most boats. There are other things you can do, which I'll go through in a minute, which make the system even more bomb-proof. But that on its own will probably solve 90% of problems that you have with contaminated fuel. All you need is a decent supply of filters, so that if something goes, you can change it. Okay, step two. So we've now got a fuel system which will handle quite a lot of problems and means that you can change your filters and drain any mucky fuel off on the go. But ideally, we don't want those problems to arise. Now, this depends a little bit on where you are. I cruise on quite long voyages, or I'm planning to cruise on long voyages in remote coasts. I may be picking up diesel from a small fueling point in the middle of nowhere. How long have they had that fuel in their tanks? Don't know. The other thing is, depends on how big your tanks are. I've got a relatively small tank, it's about 50 gallons, but this engine is super economical. That gives me about 600 sea miles running. So I could well fill up at the beginning of the season, maybe top it off towards the end. I could finish up with 40 litres of diesel sat there at the end of the season. It's going to sit over winter. I've got a stainless steel fuel tank. They're prone to condensation in cold weather. All tanks are prone to getting condensation. So I may start next season running on a fuel supply that's been stored in a tank over the winter. It may have picked up some water from condensation. There could have been some muck in there as well that's accumulated over time. The bottom of tanks do tend to collect debris over time. My tanks are not that accessible. I don't particularly want to be trying to open the tank up and getting me a hand in there to scrub out the bottom of the tank. That's not a nice job. So step two is this pump here. So once the main fuel line comes down here, it carries on in a loop. It comes round to the intake of this pump. This is a fairly big 12 volt fuel pump. It's a vane style pump that has an output of around 200 litres a minute, which is massive. Okay, from there goes through the pump, comes through this pipe and comes out next door in the locker, and I'll show you that in a second. Just need to read it. Right, this may get a bit wobbly because I can't get the tripod in here, but that pipe I just showed you comes out here. So that feeds into this first filter. That is a 30 micron filter. Transfers through to that one. That is a 10 micron filter. The output from that one goes to my main fuel return line straight back to the tank. I've got the return line from the engine linked into there as well, with a T. The idea of these, they look enormous. They are enormous. These are the sort of things you see on large motorboats and on 60-foot sailing boats. So why have I got this in a 32-foot boat? This is not part of the fuel system. This is a fuel scrubber. The idea is that it needs enough flow to cycle the fuel in the tank reasonably quickly, 4 or 5 minutes. But the main thing is I need the return fuel line blasting into the tank hard enough to give everything a thorough stir up, so that any muck that's accumulated on the bottom of the tank gets churned around, and if I cycle the fuel through this filter system a couple of times, it will get rid of any water, any debris, anything that's any sediment that's collecting in the bottom of the tank, and it will thoroughly scrub my entire diesel supply. A 10 micron filter is the same size as your final fuel filter on the engine, so that is going to give you super clean fuel. You do need a filter system this size to make an effective scrubber. You can't just use the little ones that you normally see feeding the fuel system. It's got to be big enough to blast that fuel through. And the idea of this is, if I fill up anywhere where the diesel might be a bit dodgy, or at the beginning of the season when fuel's been standing over the winter, or for any other reason, I can cycle that system and I can clean all my fuel. I would normally do this perhaps a couple of times a season, and ideally I'm probably going to do this each time I fill up. Depends a bit where it is. If it's a fuel dock that's selling tons of fuel, like the dock here is a fairly commercial dock, they get through a lot of fuel. Their fuel is good. But a lot of the small marinas on this coast, I don't know how long the fuel's been in that tank. Could have anything in it. I have seen Dieselbug. You do not want to see that stuff. It's like pondweed. It's a gloopy mess. That stuff grows on the water in the diesel. It doesn't actually grow on the diesel. It grows on the water. This system will take all of that water out, so Dieselbug has nothing to live on. You will never get Dieselbug with a system like this. You can keep an eye on what's coming through by looking at these big glass bowls in the bottom. I'll zoom in a bit on those. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I'm peering into a locker. So that's the filter, that's the water collection bowl. It's a clear bowl, same as it is on the small filters, and you can keep an eye on what's coming out of there. If that starts looking particularly gungy, maybe you need to stop and drain it. You do that in exactly the same way by opening the drain tap at the bottom. Okay, so that's how to make a bomb-proof fuel system. Quite simple. Incidentally, a fuel scrubber is not cheap. If you can pick up some of these second-hand, yeah, it's well worth doing, because new, these are over $1,000. The filter that goes inside is not super expensive. They're about $40 each. But the filter unit itself is a pretty expensive piece of kit.